big, bold statement up front. Human skeletal, that's the muscles we kind of move for movement and like moving your arms, your legs and that. Human skeletal movement occurs because muscles work in pairs. You might already have this intuition, but let's make sure we understand it. Let me take my image here of a bicep curl. Now, let's just go through this before we name anything and start giving labels to stuff. We have a muscle that's here. You guys, I'm pretty confident you know that. I'll just draw it like that. I'm pretty confident that you know that the blue muscle now is the bicep. And I'll go for sort of a yellow or something on the other side. And you probably know that you've got a muscle here going down and inserting on the point of the elbow, and it goes up. I won't get into where its origin is, but you probably know that the yellow muscle there is the tricep. And let's assume that this person is lifting this dumbbell upwards. Okay, now let's have a think about what would need to happen. Well, first of all, our bicep muscle, let me go back to me blue, my bicep muscle, what it's going to need to do is going to need to contract. Okay, it's going to need to contract, it's going to need to apply force in this direction. Okay, but just imagine a scenario that my tricep muscle, or the tricep muscle here, at the same time, it pulls up and it applies force in that direction. We would get kind of a rigid tension between these two things and nothing would happen. So rather what the tricep does is it relaxes and it allows this motion to occur. In other words, we have one muscle which is contracting, another which is relaxing. That is called an antagonistic muscle pair. In fact, it's called antagonistic movement. Now, which one is which? Now, I wonder if I can do this. I'm just going to switch off my kind of annotations just for now. I just want you to notice this kind of labeling. In the example that I just gave, just go back up to here. In the example that I've just given, this is the upwards action. We've got something called a PM, the prime mover. Now that prime mover, its other name is the agonist. Okay, the agonist or the agonist in reality. The prime mover here is the agonist. And the ant bit, this refers to the antagonist. And I want to show you what these things do. In my example, the antagonist is relaxing. We've just said that. The tricep is relaxing. That's its job. Its job is to allow, and that's a really nice word for you to get into your answers, to allow the movement to occur through relaxation. Whereas the prime mover, the agonist job, its job is effectively to contract. It is also, the word we'd like to use is, it's producing or causing the movement. But this is where it gets interesting. In my example, my prime mover here, what it's doing is it's contracting and it's shortening. But what if I was to tell you that muscles can contract and shorten, they can contract and lengthen, they can contract and stay the same length? And I'm going to come back to this idea in a moment. The one we've looked at so far is it's contracted and shortened. This is the really obvious one, and as a result this dumbbell is curled up in this direction. Now let's take a different example. We could actually use the one we just done, but let's take a different example. I've got a person doing a press up here. Let's actually start with phase B. I'm interested in the tricep, I'm interested in the bicep. Okay, so what happens here is when this person pushes up, actually going from phase B to phase A, the tricep needs to contract. And because it's going to contract, we know it's the prime mover, it's the agonist. When that happens, the bicep has to relax. We know that, it's the antagonist. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Let's now think from phase A to phase B. This person is now going to lower themselves. Now, what if I was to tell you, forget the elastic, by the way, we're just ignoring that the tricep this time, it also contracts. But this time, it contracts and it lengthens. Because, look, it's contracting, it is still the prime mover, it is still the agonist. Because it's contracting and lengthening, the bicep has to relax, it is still the antagonist. So we have got different types of contractions and we need to get the intuition of this. Now, that's loosely talking about the elbow. Before we get into those types of contractions, I just want to show you some other pairs of muscles. So I'd like you to focus on this person's ankle. Okay, so we've got the ankle here. Now, let's call this phase A here. Phase A, this is the first bit. What's going to happen here is we see that the ankle is pointed downwards like this. We know that that is plantar flexion. Plantar flexion. Now, in order to achieve that, the gastrocnemius muscle has to pull on the Achilles and pull upwards in order to point this toe downwards. Okay, so that's plantar flexion. So as a result of that, our gastrocnemius, what a word, our gastrocnemius is our prime mover. It is our agonist. But in order for that to happen, that's contracting to cause that movement. But in order for that to happen, we have to have the muscle on the front of the tibia. Let's call it the tibialis anterior. The tibialis anterior. Guess what that has to do? That has to relax. And because it has to relax, it makes it the antagonist in that single phase of jumping upwards. Now, this is where it gets interesting again. I'm just going to sort of throw this at you as intuition before I teach it to you later on. When this person comes back down, what if I was to tell you that the gastrocnemius, that I'll just put the gastrocnemius, the gast, it remains as the prime mover. It contracts and lengthens. It contracts and lengthens. It is acting as a brake, as in the brakes you push on your bike or on your car or whatever. It's acting as a brake. It's slowing this person down in their downward descent. And because it's still the prime mover, that means by definition that the tibialis anterior, it remains as the antagonist. It has to relax to allow that. So I'm starting to hint here again towards types of contractions. Now, one last pair I just want to mention to you. I just want to mention the pair of the gluteals and the hip flexors. Okay, so we've got, I'll just put G and hip flexors. Just remind yourself that when the gluteals contract, it brings the leg back at the hip into this position. When the hip flexors contract, it brings the leg in front. And of course, in order for that to be the case, those contract and relax in combination. They are a pair and they work antagonistically with the agonist prime mover and the antagonist. Now, with all that understood, I want to take you down to this, which I hope is going to express what I've been trying to get to here. Notice that we have got two groupings of contractions. I've got an isometric contraction. This is when a muscle, notice that it's contracting. Look, tension. It is contracting, but it stays the same length. Now, I encourage you to think of your own example of that. It's often about stillness when we find these things, but I'm going to go way back up to the top. And I want you to notice this person's abdominals here remain at the same length throughout this motion. They are contracted and they're under tension, but they stay the same length. I could actually say the same thing about the quadricep group. Okay, in this case, they remain the same length. Imagine that this person here holds that position and there's no upward, anti-clockwise or downwards clockwise motion. What would you say? That is an isometric contraction. Now, we don't really teach this on this course, but I'm just going to throw it to you. In order to do an isometric contraction, we need two at least agonists. Now, I'll just leave you with that thought and see if that means anything. I'm not going to teach it to you. I'm just going to see if it means something to you, if you just reflect on it. But the other group of contractions we've got is we've got isotonic contractions. This is where there is movement. Okay, so movement occurs. It's not staying the same length. And notice there's two ways. One is when the muscle shortens under tension. This is the bicep in the bicep curl upward phase. It is under tension and it's shortening. But if I go back to that example, if this person now starts lowering this this dumbbell, this bicep is going to remain the prime mover. And what's it going to do? It's going to lengthen under tension. And we call that an eccentric contraction. It is a contraction, but it's lengthening. Now, just quickly on these will be really obvious to you, I think. These ones often people find less obvious. We get eccentric contractions when the muscle is acting as a brake. It's often when we are decelerating ourselves or something else. Think about catching a medicine ball. Oof, that's hard sometimes. Think about when you're coming down a really steep hill, maybe doing some mountain walking, and your quads work really hard as your foot hits that sort of point lower than your other foot. That's an eccentric contraction. You're decelerating your descent in essence. That is what eccentric contractions are for. So when we're landing, when we are catching, these sorts of things, we tend to find a deceleration. the muscle will lengthen under tension and work as an eccentric contraction. Cheers.